Am I telling you this story for sympathy? No, I'm long past needing that. I'm telling you because I think it's important to understand that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor so dark and twisted, it borders on poetic, and sometimes the very thing that was meant to destroy you ends up becoming the foundation of your fortress. My fortress is small. It's a second-floor office in a pre-war building with original hardwood floors that sigh when you walk on them. It smells of old paper, fresh ink, and the lemon polish I use on the mahogany desk I bought with my own money. On the wall, in a simple black frame, is my notary public commission. It's just a piece of paper, but to me, it's a monument. It's the final gravestone on a life I was forced to bury. My name is Lydia, and that old life was as the wife of a man named Greg. When Greg left me, he didn't just walk out the door. He detonated our life and walked away from the rubble without a scratch, leaving me buried underneath it. He said his tech startup, the one I'd supported with my teaching salary for 3 long years, was failing. He claimed we were drowning in debt. During the divorce, his lawyers produced stacks of documents showing liabilities, losses, and imminent collapse. He looked at me across a sterile courtroom, his face a mask of weary regret, and swore under oath that he was practically destitute. I was left with a mountain of shared credit card debt he'd run up, a pittance of a settlement that barely covered my legal fees, and a profound, soul-crushing sense of failure. So I did the only thing I could. I started digging my way out. I sold what little I had left, moved into a room in a shared apartment, and put myself through school. Not a fancy university, just a local community college program. I became a notary public. It wasn't glamorous, but it was respectable. It was a profession built on integrity, on witnessing truth. It was everything my old life with Greg hadn't been. I saved every penny, and after 2 years I opened this office. It was my sanctuary, a quiet space where I was in control, where my name meant something. I had found peace, or at least a quiet, stable truce with my past. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, the little brass bell I'd hung on the door jingled. The man who walked in was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire first year's rent. It was impeccably tailored, a soft gray wool that whispered wealth. He was tan, his teeth were unnaturally white, and his watch was a thick slab of steel and glass that caught the afternoon light. He was older, harder, and more polished than the man I remembered, but beneath the expensive veneer, it was him. It was Greg. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room, replaced by a thick, suffocating pressure. He was holding the door for a woman who glided in behind him. She was young, maybe 25, with blonde hair that fell in effortless waves, and a diamond on her finger, the size of a robin's egg. She was beautiful in that effortless, expensive way that suggests a life free of any real hardship. Greg's eyes swept across my little office, a flicker of something, pity, disdain, in his gaze. He looked right at me, right through me, and there was not a single spark of recognition. To him I was just part of the worn furniture, a functionary, a nobody. "Hi there," he said, his voice dripping with a smug, easygoing charm I knew all too well. "My fiancé and I need a couple of things notarized. Running a bit behind schedule, you know how it is with wedding planning." He introduced the woman as Penelope. She gave me a tight, polite smile. My own face felt like a plaster mask. I prayed it wouldn't crack. I just nodded, my tongue feeling thick and useless in my mouth. I gestured towards the 2 client chairs in front of my desk. Greg sat down and slid 2 documents across the polished wood. "Just the marriage license, and this," he said, tapping a thick spiral-bound document. "A little prenuptial agreement. Can't be too careful, you know. Have to protect the assets." He winked at Penelope, who giggled, a light, airy sound that grated on my nerves like scraping metal. My hands were trembling under the desk, so I clasped them together in my lap. I picked up the prenup, the paper cool against my skin. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I forced myself to look professional, to breathe. As a notary, I am legally obligated to do 2 things above all else: verify the identities of the signatories, and ensure they are signing willingly. But there's an ethical component, a gray area my instructors had drilled into us. We are gatekeepers of trust. I flipped open the prenup to the section that always came first, the schedule of assets. My eyes scanned the list, and then I saw it. A holding company based in the Cayman Islands, Osprey Holdings. A numbered account with a Swiss bank. a portfolio of stocks under a corporate shield called Aperture Investments, a deed for a piece of undeveloped land in Montana. It wasn't just a list of assets, it was a ghost from my past, a specter of lies that had haunted my every waking moment for 5 years. They were the very same assets, the same corporate entities, the same hidden accounts he had sworn under oath did not exist. The assets he had hidden from me, from the court, from the world, to ensure I walked away with nothing. And now, he was sitting in front of me, a stranger in my own life, smugly asking me to put my official seal, my name, my integrity, on the very document that proved his perjury. He didn't just want a notary, he wanted his victim to legally validate his crime. The universe wasn't just poetic, it was savage. They left a few minutes later. I'd managed to find my voice, a thin, reedy version of it that I barely recognized. I explained that a document of this complexity, particularly with the financial disclosures, required careful review to ensure all the notarial blocks were correct. It was a lie, of course. The blocks were standard, but it was a plausible lie. I quoted them a fee, a ridiculously high one, 3 times my usual rate for such a thing. Greg didn't even blink. He just pulled a thick money clip from his pocket and slapped several $100 bills on my desk. "Whatever it takes," he said, dismissively. "Just have it ready for us by the end of the week. Penelope and I are flying to Bali on Saturday." He told me his assistant would call to schedule the final signing. He didn't even ask for my name. The moment the door clicked shut, the brass bell jingling its cheerful little tune, the strength I'd been feigning evaporated. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my back against the heavy wooden desk. My carefully constructed piece, the fragile calm I had worked so hard to build, shattered into a million pieces. The room, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The air was thick with the ghost of him, his expensive cologne, his casual arrogance. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, trying to hold myself together, but a tremor started in my hands and spread through my entire body. A low guttural sound escaped my lips, a sob that felt like it was being ripped from the deepest part of me. It wasn't a cry of sadness, it was a cry of pure, undiluted rage. Rage at the injustice, at the sheer cosmic audacity of it all. He hadn't just gotten away with it, he was flaunting it. He had erased me so completely from his life that he could look me in the face and not even see the woman whose dreams he had pulverized to build his new empire. The prenup lay on my desk like a venomous snake. I couldn't stop staring at it. Each line item in that schedule of assets was a new stab wound. Osprey Holdings. I remembered that name. Greg had once joked about it over dinner, years ago, back when we were. He'd said it was a thought experiment, a business plan for a consulting firm he was noodling on. He'd used my laptop to register the domain name. It was just a game, he'd said, a fantasy. But it wasn't a fantasy, it was the blueprint for his escape. My mind splintered, tumbling back through time, the past rushing in to fill the vacuum of the present. I remembered our first apartment, a cramped one-bedroom with a leaky faucet and mismatched furniture we'd found on the curb. We were poor, but it didn't matter, we had each other. We'd lie on the floor, sharing a pizza, drawing up plans for his software company, on the back of a napkin. He was the visionary, he'd said, and I was the foundation. I believed him. I worked a full-time teaching job and picked up shifts waiting tables at night so he could quit his job and focus on coding. I paid our rent, our bills, our groceries. I poured every spare dollar and every ounce of my belief into his dream. "It's our dream, Lydie," he used to say, kissing my forehead. "One day, we're going to be on top of the world." The memories shifted, darkening at the edges. The company, which we'd called Nexus, finally took off. The first big contract. The move to a bigger house. The first time he hired an employee. I was so proud, but something changed in him. It was subtle at first, the we slowly became. It was no longer our success, it was my company. He started working later and later. When I'd ask about the business, about the finances, he'd pat my head condescendingly. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, honey, it's complicated stuff." This from the man who couldn't have afforded his first server without my tips from the diner. He started having lunches with investors and dinners with clients. He bought the expensive suits, the Swiss watch, Our life together became a series of transactions he conducted while I maintained the home front, a silent, uncompensated partner. Then came the divorce. It wasn't a dramatic fight, it was cold, clinical. He sat me down in our perfect living room, the one I had decorated, and told me he wasn't happy, that he'd outgrown me. He said the business was in trouble, that the stress was killing him, and that he needed to be alone to fix it. It was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative, to set the stage for his financial disappearing act. His lawyer was a piranha in $1,000 suit. My lawyer, a public defender, overworked and underpaid, was a goldfish. They produced ledgers, projections, debt statements. They painted a picture of Nexus as a ship taking on water, about to sink. Greg got on the stand, his face a perfect picture of anguish, and detailed the catastrophic losses. He claimed Osprey Holdings was a shell he'd created to absorb debt, that the Swiss account was a failed attempt to secure European funding that had been closed empty. He perjured himself with a breathtaking ease that spoke of practice. I sat there, watching the man I had loved and built a life with systematically erase our shared history and my financial future. The judge, seeing the mountain of evidence, sided with him. I was awarded the debt and a small one-time payment he called a gesture of goodwill. I remember my lawyer telling me, "It's a bad deal, Lydia, but it's the only one on the table. We can't prove he's lying. Take it and run." Run where? I had nowhere to go. I lost the house. I lost my savings. I lost my dignity. I ended up in a tiny bleak apartment, the silence of it a constant screaming reminder of my failure. For months I was a ghost. I'd drift through my days, in a fog of shame and disbelief. I applied for teaching jobs, but the gap in my resume was hard to explain. Rejection after rejection followed. I was drowning. One night, sitting alone in that miserable apartment, surrounded by bills I couldn't pay, something inside me snapped. It was the quiet, final click of a lock falling into place. I was done being a victim. I was done waiting for someone to save me. If I was going to survive, I had to do it myself. Spite is a powerful motivator. I saw an ad for a notary certification program at the local college. It was affordable. It was a trade. It was something tangible. I enrolled the next day. I studied like a woman possessed. I highlighted textbooks until they were more yellow than white. I made flashcards. I drank gallons of bitter burnt coffee from a stained pot and memorized legal statutes and ethical codes. The language of law, once used as a weapon against me, now felt like armor I was forging for myself. The day I passed the state exam, I didn't celebrate. I just sat in my car, in the testing center parking lot, and cried, not from sadness, but from a profound exhausted relief. I had done it. I had built 1 square foot of solid ground in a world that had become quicksand. Now sitting on the floor of my own office, the past and present collided with the force of a car crash. He had handed me the murder weapon, still slick with his fingerprints. The injustice of it all was a physical thing, a hot, metallic taste in my mouth. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers still shaking. I needed to hear a friendly voice. I needed an anchor. I called Clara. Clara has been my best friend since college. She's a freelance graphic designer, a brilliant artist, with a spine of steel, and a mouth that could make a sailor blush. She'd been my rock during the divorce, the one who brought me groceries when I couldn't afford them, and who let me rage and cry on her couch without judgment. "Lydie, what's wrong? You sound like you just saw a ghost," she said, her voice instantly sharp with concern. The story tumbled out of me, a torrent of words, of shock and rage, and a kind of hysterical, dark amusement. I told her everything. Greg, Penelope, the prenup, the assets. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. "That son of a bitch," she hissed. "That absolute platinum-plated son of a bitch." Then her tone shifted. Okay, breathe. What are you going to do?" "I don't know, Clara. I could just refuse to sign. I could call the bar association. I could shred it and pretend they never came in." "No," she said, her voice firm. "No, you're not going to do any of that. This isn't just a random act of God, Lydie. This is a gift. He walked into your office and handed you a confession." As I listened to her, I could hear a simmering frustration in her own voice.
I asked her what was wrong. She sighed. Oh, it's just this client, Vanguard Tech. I did a massive rebranding project for them, worked for 2 months straight, delivered everything, and now the project manager is ghosting me. Sent one email saying the final deliverables didn't align with the revised brief, a brief they never sent me. They're trying to stiff me for 10 grand. It was a classic move in her industry, a way for big companies to bully small freelancers into giving up. It was a smaller scale, a different context, but it was the same disease, the arrogant belief that you can just take what you want from people you see as beneath you. What are you going to do? I asked, her problem momentarily eclipsing my own. I'm going to fight it, she said, a new determination in her voice. I've got the emails, I've got the original contract. I'm not letting them get away with it. It's not just about the money anymore. It's the principle. Her words resonated deep within me. The principle. For 5 years, I had been governed by the principle of survival, but now something else was taking root. I looked at the prenup on my desk. He wasn't just committing a new fraud against Penelope. He was building his new life on the bedrock of his old crime against me. He was asking me to be a passive accessory to my own erasure, and in that moment, the catalyst occurred. The despair, the shock, the grief, they burned away, leaving behind something cold, clear and hard as diamond. It was resolve. Clara was right. This wasn't a cosmic joke. It was an opportunity. A weapon had been placed in my hand. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking back the narrative. It was about the principle. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. I stood up, my legs steady now. I walked over to the desk, and picked up the prenup. I smoothed out the pages. I wasn't going to shred it. I wasn't going to refuse it. I was going to use it. I was going to dismantle Greg's life, with the very tools he had handed me, and I was going to do it from behind my quiet, respectable mahogany desk, using the full quiet power of the law he had so arrogantly flaunted. The hunt was on.
The first 48 hours were a blur of methodical fury. I didn't sleep. I survived on coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. My first step was to lock the original prenup and the cash Greg had given me in the old, heavy safe I kept in the back closet. This was evidence. It was sacred. Then I turned my office into a war room. I unearthed the boxes from my divorce, the ones I had sealed up and shoved into the back of a storage unit because looking at them was like touching a hot stove. I'd paid the monthly fee on that unit for 5 years, a grim tax on a life I wanted to forget. Now, I was grateful for it. I spread the old court documents across my floor. The transcripts of Greg's testimony, the fraudulent financial statements from his company, the final divorce decree. It was a paper trail of my own humiliation. For years, these documents had represented my powerlessness. Now, they were my arsenal. I created a spreadsheet, a meticulous cross-reference. On one side, the assets Greg swore under oath didn't exist. On the other, the exact same assets listed in his prenuptial agreement with Penelope. Osprey Holdings, Aperture Investments, the Swiss account. It was all there. A perfect, undeniable match. My notary training had taught me about the importance of the notary journal, a detailed log of every notarial act. It's a public record. My refusal to notarize, and the reason for it, would become a matter of public record if challenged. But simply refusing felt too small, too passive. It would alert Penelope, certainly, and cause chaos for Greg, but it wouldn't reclaim what he had stolen from me. This was about more than just stopping his new deception. It was about rectifying the old one. I realized I was out of my depth. Spite and a notary commission were a good start, but they weren't enough to take on a man like Greg and his team of legal sharks. I needed a shark of my own. The problem was, sharks are expensive, and my savings were still modest. I couldn't afford the kind of high-powered law firm Greg would have on retainer, so I went hunting for a different kind of predator, the young, hungry one. I spent a whole day researching small, independent family law practices in the city. I looked for lawyers who had recently started their own firms, lawyers who had glowing reviews from clients who'd been underdogs. I was looking for someone with something to prove. That's how I found Marcus Thorne. His website was simple. His photo showed a man in his early 30s with intense eyes and a sharp suit that looked like it was his only one. His bio was short and to the point. Fighting for the fair fight. It sounded a little corny, but it resonated. I called his office. He answered the phone himself. I told him I had a potential fraud case related to a divorce settlement, and I had concrete, recent evidence. There was a pause on the line, and then he said, "How soon can you be here?" I walked into his small, cluttered office an hour later with a briefcase containing my spreadsheet and copies of the key documents, the old testimony, and the new prenup. I laid it all out on his desk. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes scanning the pages. He read Greg's sworn testimony from the divorce. Then he read the schedule of assets from the prenup. He put the 2 pages side by side. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a chess player who has just seen a path to checkmate in 3 moves. "Oh, this is not good for him," Marcus said, his voice a low whistle. "This is not good for him at all. This," he tapped the prenup, "is a confession. And this," he tapped the court transcript, "is the crime." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming. "Let me explain just how bad this is for your ex-husband, Lydia. First, we have criminal liability. Perjury is a felony. Presenting fraudulent evidence in a court of law, also a felony. A district attorney, with a taste for white-collar crime, would have a field day with this. We're talking potential jail time." My stomach did a little flip. Jail. I hadn't even considered that. "Second," he continued, holding up 2 fingers, "we have the civil case. The statute of limitations on fraud is typically a few years, but there's a beautiful little thing called the discovery rule. The clock doesn't start ticking until the fraud is discovered, or reasonably should have been discovered. You just discovered it. We can file a motion to set aside the original divorce judgment on the basis of extrinsic fraud. That means the entire settlement gets thrown out. We go back to square one, only this time, we know where all the money is. We're not just talking about 50% of these hidden assets. We're talking about 50% plus 5 years of interest, plus punitive damages for the fraud itself. We'll strip him to the bone." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And third, the cherry on top. This prenup, it's worthless. A prenuptial agreement is a contract, and a contract based on fraudulent disclosure is voidable. If his fiancée, Penelope, finds out about this, she can have it invalidated the day after she signs it. Your ex-husband tried to protect his assets from his new wife using a document that proves he stole them from his old wife. It's so stupid it's beautiful." Hearing it all laid out like that, so clinically, so brutally, was intoxicating. It was validation on a scale I had never dared to imagine. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Do we sue? Do we go to the police?" Marcus steepled his fingers. "We could, but a public fight is messy. It's long, it's expensive, and the outcome, while likely, is never guaranteed. And it gives him time to hide the money again, to move it around. No, we don't want a war, we want a surrender." That's when he laid out the plan. It was simple, elegant, and utterly ruthless. We wouldn't file a lawsuit. We would draft a private settlement agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, essentially. In it we would lay out our entire case, just as he had for me. We would list the evidence, the statutes he'd violated, the legal consequences, and we would make him an offer. The terms were brutal. Greg would pay me 60% of the current value of all the assets he had hidden. The extra 10% was for emotional distress and punitive damages. He would also pay an additional sum to cover my original divorce debt, with interest. And of course he would pay Marcus's legal fees in full. The money was to be transferred via a secure wire to an account of my choosing within 72 hours of signing. In exchange for his signature and the money, I would sign an NDA, promising never to speak of his past fraud to anyone, including the authorities or Penelope. As for the prenup, I would simply fulfill my professional duty. I would send a formal letter to both him and Penelope, stating that I was ethically bound to refuse notarization, but I would not give the specific reason, unless legally compelled to do so. "We give him a choice," Marcus explained. "He can have a quiet, private financial catastrophe that lets him save face and stay out of prison, or he can have a very loud, very public, life-destroying inferno. We let him choose his own poison." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was perfect. It was a plan that used his own fear and his own desperation to get what I was owed. It wasn't about destroying him publicly. It was about a quiet, efficient transfer of power. I also had my other ally, Clara. While Marcus was my strategist, Clara was my drill sergeant. We met for coffee the next day. She was buzzing with her own victory. She had sent a stern, legally vetted email to her deadbeat client, attaching her contract and the complete email chain. She'd given them 48 hours to pay the invoice in full before she filed in small claims court and went public with their unethical business practices on every design forum she could find. Guess who got a panicked call from their head of accounting an hour ago? She said, grinning. The money's on its way, you just have to show them you're not afraid to bite back. She made me role-play the inevitable confrontation with Greg. We sat in that noisy coffee shop, and she played him, throwing every possible insult and threat at me. You're a bitter, washed-up gold digger. She'd snarl in her best imitation of a pompous jerk. I am a businesswoman rectifying a fraudulent transaction. I'd reply, my voice shaking at first. Try again, she'd command. Deeper, firmer, no emotion. You are a glacier, you are a rock, he can't move you. We did it over and over, until my voice was low and steady, until the words felt like my own. She helped me pick out what I would wear for the meeting, a simple dark professional dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back. You're not Lydia, his ex-wife, she said. You're Lydia, the notary. You're an instrument of the law. You have to look the part. By the end of the week, everything was in place. Marcus had drafted the settlement agreement. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. I had my script memorized. I had my armor on. All that was left was to summon the dragon to my cave. Greg's assistant called on Thursday morning. A crisp, efficient voice. Mr. Miller would like to schedule the signing for tomorrow afternoon. Of course, I said, my voice as calm and cool as I could make it. However, before we proceed with the full signing, I have a few standard verification questions regarding the financial schedules. It's a procedural matter. For efficiency's sake, it would be best if I spoke with Mr. Miller alone first. Say 4:30 tomorrow. We can have Miss Vance join us once the preliminary checks are complete. There was a pause, then a sigh of impatience on the other end. Fine, he'll be there at 4:30. The bait was set. The trap was laid. For the first time in 5 years, I felt a sense of profound, exhilarating control. He thought he was coming to my office to finalize his triumphant future. He had no idea he was walking into a reckoning. Friday afternoon arrived, draped in a heavy gray overcast that matched my mood. The air in my office felt thick with anticipation. I'd spent the day in a state of suspended animation, unable to focus on any other work. My stomach a tight knot of nerves and steely resolve. At 4:25, I turned the lighting down low, leaving only the small focused pool of light from the green banker's lamp on my desk. I put on the pair of non-prescription reading glasses Clara had insisted I buy. They were part of the costume, part of the transformation from Lydia the victim to Lydia the official. The jingle of the bell at exactly 4:30 made me jump, despite expecting it. Greg strode in, bringing a gust of cold, damp air with him. He was alone. He didn't even bother with a greeting, just started talking, as he shrugged off his expensive overcoat. Let's make this quick, he said, his voice clipped with impatience. I've got dinner reservations at 7. Is it all ready to go? He sat in the client chair, tapping his fingers on the armrest, a king impatient with the slow service. He still didn't see me. He just saw a function, a roadblock on his way to Bali. I let the silence stretch. I watched him under the brim of my glasses, letting his impatience curdle into irritation. He finally looked up, properly looked at me, annoyed. Well, slowly, deliberately, I reached up and took off the glasses, placing them on the desk beside the lamp. I leaned forward into the pool of light, making sure he could see my face clearly. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs, but my voice, when it came out, was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice Clara and I had practiced. It was the voice of the glacier. Hello, Greg. The change in him was instantaneous and profound. It was like watching a film run backward. The arrogance, the impatience, the confidence, it all spooled back in a split second, leaving behind a raw, gaping vacuum of shock. His jaw literally dropped. His face, which had been fashionably tan, turned a pale, pasty white. The color drained from his lips. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost, which in a way, he had. I was the ghost of a life he thought he had successfully buried and forgotten. Lydia, he whispered, the name a puff of air, a question mark. What are you doing here? I work here, I said, my voice still unnervingly even.
This is my office. I'm a notary public now. You'd be surprised what a person can accomplish when they're left with nothing but their own determination. I let that hang in the air between us, a quiet accusation. He stared at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to process the impossible coincidence. The gears were turning, catching, grinding. I could see the moment the next realization dawned, the prenup. His eyes darted to the document, sitting on my desk, then back to my face. The shock was rapidly being replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. This is a joke, right? He stammered, a pathetic laugh escaping his lips. Some kind of setup. There's no setup, Greg, I said. There's just you, me, and this document. I tapped the prenup with one finger. The one where you list, in painstaking detail, all the assets you swore under oath you didn't have 5 years ago. Osprey Holdings, Aperture Investments, the land in Montana. It's quite a comprehensive list. You were always so meticulous. His bravado tried to reassert itself, a reflex action. You can't prove anything, he blustered, his voice rising. He lunged forward, reaching for the document. I was faster. I slid it out of his reach, placing my hand firmly on top of it. I don't have to prove anything, Greg. You did it for me. You walked into my office, into my new life, and you handed me a signed confession. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a raw, animal panic. He started to sweat. A bead of moisture trickled down from his temple. What do you want, Lydia? Money? Is that what this is? A shakedown? Because I'll pay. Just name a price. I almost laughed. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. He was trying to buy my silence, to settle this new problem with the very money he had stolen from me in the first place. It's a little more complicated than that, I said. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the settlement agreement Marcus had drafted. It was in a crisp, professional-looking folder. I slid it across the desk towards him. I think you'll want to read this. I suggest you read it very carefully. He opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly. I watched his face as he read. I saw his eyes flicker over the legal terminology, the references to the penal code, the words felony perjury, and fraudulent concealment. I saw the moment he got to the schedule of payments, to the staggering number we were demanding. All the color that had momentarily returned to his face drained away again. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. This is insane, he whispered. This is extortion. No, I said, leaning back in my chair, feeling a sense of power I had never known. Extortion is when you demand something you're not entitled to. I'm just collecting on a debt you created 5 years ago, in a courtroom, under oath. This is just the bill, Greg. It's long overdue. He tried to fight back, to find some leverage. He tried appealing to our past. Lydia, please, think about what you're doing. We had good years. Don't throw all that away for this. You threw it away, Greg. You threw it away for a Swiss bank account. He tried threats. I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone you're a crazy, bitter ex-wife, using your position to blackmail me. No one will ever use your services again. Go ahead, I said, my voice still quiet. The quiet that Clara said was my weapon. The notary journal is a public record. It will simply state that I refused to notarize your signature because I had direct knowledge that the document contained fraudulent information. The rest, it'll be your word against this folder. And this folder has documentation. What will you have? A motive for me to lie? I think your history of perjury will make that a very hard case to sell. He deflated. Every angle he tried, he found a dead end. Every argument was useless against the cold, hard facts he himself had provided. He slumped in his chair, a broken, cornered animal. The smug, confident man who had walked in 20 minutes ago was gone, replaced by this pale, sweating, terrified creature. He just sat there, staring at the document, the instrument of his undoing, while the silence in my little office grew louder and louder until it was the only thing left in the world. Greg left my office like a man in a trance. He didn't say another word, just took the settlement agreement, put on his coat, and walked out into the gloomy evening. The bell on the door sounding a final, mocking little jingle. The weekend that followed was the longest of my life. I was a bundle of raw nerves, flinching every time my phone buzzed, expecting a call from his lawyer with threats and counteroffers. But the call didn't come.
Instead, the assault began on a different front. On Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it would be. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Eleanor, Greg's mother. Her voice was a venomous whisper, dripping with decades of practiced condescension. She'd always seen me as beneath her son, a temporary starter wife he would eventually shed for a more suitable model. Lydia, the voice oozed, I don't know what kind of disgusting game you're playing, but you need to stop it right now. Gregory has finally found happiness with a lovely young woman, and you are trying to ruin it out of sheer bitterness. A woman scorned. It's so common, have some dignity for once in your life, and let him go. I deleted the message without a flicker of emotion. An hour later, another call. This time I answered. It was his brother David. David was the family's golden child, the one who could do no wrong. While Greg was the ruthless businessman, David was the charming layabout, drifting through life on a cloud of family money and unearned confidence. He'd always treated me with a kind of playful contempt, like a family pet he found mildly amusing. Lydy, hey, he said, his voice slick with false bonhomie. Listen, Mom told me you and Greg had a misunderstanding. I get it, you're upset. But you can't be serious with this crazy demand. You're going to destroy him. You're going to destroy the family. The family seems to have done just fine with the money he stole from me. David, I said, my voice flat. I remembered a picture he'd posted online a few years ago, christening a brand new sailboat. The timing, I now realized, coincided perfectly with a major investment Greg had made in one of his shell corporations. It was my money that bought that boat. My sacrifice had funded their luxury. Come on, that's not fair, he whined. Greg made some mistakes. Sure, he was under a lot of pressure. But this is nuclear. Look, I can talk to him. I'm sure we can work something out. A more reasonable figure. Something to help you get back on your feet. What do you say? It was breathtaking. The casual assumption that they could still control this, that they could buy me off with a pittance, with a fraction of what was mine. They weren't just complicit, they were shareholders in the fraud. They had all benefited from my destruction. This is not a negotiation, David, I said coldly. This is a legal matter between me and your brother. Do not contact me again. I hung up before he could respond, and then blocked both his and Eleanor's numbers. The family exodus had begun, but not in the way I'd expected. They weren't abandoning him. They were circling the wagons, trying to protect their shared treasure chest from the woman who had originally filled it. Their panicked intervention only solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about me and Greg anymore. It was about all of them. Finally, on Sunday evening, Greg himself called. The man on the other end of the line was a stranger. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. The blustering was gone. All that was left was a thin, hollow shell of desperation. Lydia, he began, his voice raspy. Please, we have to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Greg. The offer is on the table. You don't understand, he pleaded, his voice cracking. If this comes out, Penelope will leave me. I know she will. She's not, she believes in honesty. The irony was so bitter it almost made me gag. My business partners, they'll scatter. The company will collapse. Everything I've built will be gone. Everything we built, you mean, I corrected him. The words sharp and precise, and it won't be gone. A significant portion of it will simply be transferred to its rightful owner. He started to bargain, his voice getting higher with panic. He offered me a third of what was in the settlement, then half. He was still trying to win, still trying to haggle over the price of his freedom. He was like a drowning man trying to negotiate with the ocean. The offer is on the table, Greg, I repeated, my voice a monotone. It is not negotiable. You have until Friday at 5 p.m. to sign it and make the transfer. If you fail to do so, my lawyer Marcus Thorne will file a motion to reopen our divorce on the grounds of fraud at 9 a.m. Monday morning. A second package, containing all the relevant evidence of perjury, will be delivered to the district attorney's office at the same time. The choice is yours. I didn't wait for a reply. I just ended the call. The ball was in his court. He could choose financial ruin, or he could choose total annihilation. For the next 5 days, there was only silence. Friday came again. The week had crawled by, each hour a separate lifetime. I'd barely eaten. I'd kept the office open, going through the motions with other clients, my smile feeling brittle and fake. Marcus had called once to check in. Stay strong, he'd said. He'll fold. They always do when the alternative is prison. At 4 o'clock, I started to feel a knot of dread forming. What if he called my bluff? What if his arrogance was so great that he thought he could fight this and win? What if I'd overplayed my hand? The thought of going back to court, of years of legal battles, was exhausting. At 4:30, the bell on the door jingled. My head snapped up. It was Greg. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled. His face was pale and drawn, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, looking confused and anxious, was Penelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a wild card, a complication I hadn't anticipated. He'd brought her as a shield, as a human buffer. He was going to try and play the victim, to paint me as the crazy, vindictive ex-wife in front of his fiancée, hoping to shame me into backing down. It was a desperate, cowardly move. "Greg, I believe I requested we meet alone," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Penelope insisted on coming," he said, not meeting my eyes. He turned to her, his face a mask of pained sincerity. "Honey, this is my ex-wife Lydia. I told you about her. She's had a very hard time moving on from our divorce. She's making some wild accusations to try and get money from me." I braced myself for the attack from Penelope, for the scorn, the judgment, but it didn't come. She just looked from his face to mine, her brow furrowed. She wasn't the vapid trophy I had painted her as in my mind. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent. She took a step forward, ignoring Greg. "You're the notary?" she asked me directly. Her voice was steady, with none of the flightiness I had expected. "I am," I replied. "Greg said you found some discrepancies in the financial paperwork," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "He said it was just a few clerical errors, but that you were blowing it out of proportion. Is that true?" This was it, the moment of truth. I had a choice. I could destroy him right here, in front of her, or I could stick to the plan, maintain my professional distance. I looked at her, at the genuine confusion and worry in her eyes, and I made a decision. It wasn't about protecting Greg. It was about respecting the truth, and she, an innocent party in all this, deserved at least a piece of it. I looked directly at Penelope, my voice calm and measured, the voice of a professional stating a fact. "As a commissioned notary public in this state," I began, "I am legally and ethically prohibited from notarizing a signature on any document if I have actual verifiable knowledge that the document contains false or fraudulent information. To do so would be a violation of my oath. It would subject me to civil and criminal penalties, and it would be grounds for the immediate revocation of my commission." I let the words settle in the quiet room. The financial disclosures that were provided to me in this prenuptial agreement contain significant, material, and provable falsehoods. Therefore, I must refuse to notarize it. Penelope's eyes widened slightly. She turned back to Greg, a question dawning on her face. "What is she talking about, Greg? What falsehoods? What's false in the prenup?" Greg started to stammer. The blood drained from his face, as he realized his shield had just become a liability. "She's lying, she's making it all up. She's just trying to ruin us, Penny. Can't you see that?" But his denial was weak, laced with panic. He couldn't answer the question without incriminating himself. He couldn't explain what was false without admitting to the lie. Penelope's gaze drifted from his sweating face to my desk. Her eyes landed on the folder I had intentionally left sitting there. The settlement agreement. She reached out, her hand hesitating for a moment before she picked it up. She opened it. She didn't read the whole thing. She didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the first page, the one where Marcus had so brilliantly laid out the core of the fraud. She saw the names, Osprey Holdings, Aperture Investments, the same names listed in her own copy of the prenup. Then her eyes found the key phrase, "the fraudulent concealment of marital assets during the dissolution of his prior marriage." A small, sharp intake of breath. That was the only sound she made. She looked up from the page, her face a pale mask of dawning comprehension. She looked at Greg, not with anger, but with a kind of chilling, profound disappointment. She finally understood. She understood that the fortune she was about to marry into was built on a crime, and she understood, with sickening clarity, that the man she loved was about to do the exact same thing to her, using the exact same assets. He wasn't protecting his wealth with her. He was protecting it from her. Without a word, she closed the folder and placed it gently back on my desk. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, she pulled the enormous diamond ring from her finger.
The stone caught the light one last time, a cold, hard fire. She placed the ring on top of the folder. I think you two have things to discuss, she said, her voice trembling but miraculously firm. She turned to Greg, her eyes now filled with an icy clarity. Greg, have your lawyer call my lawyer. And with that she turned and walked out of my office. The little bell on the door jingled, a final definitive note. She didn't look back. Greg stared at the empty doorway, then at the ring sitting on the folder. He looked like he had been physically struck. All the fight, all the energy, all the life seemed to drain out of him at once. He sank into the client chair, his body slumping as if his bones had turned to dust. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He sat like that for a full minute. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were red-rimmed and utterly defeated. The powerful, arrogant titan of industry was gone. In his place was just a small, broken man who had lost everything in the space of 10 minutes. I'll sign, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Just tell me where to sign. The wire transfer arrived the following Monday. The number that appeared in my new bank account was obscene. It had so many zeros, it looked like a technical glitch. For a moment I just stared at the screen, unable to process it. It was more money than I had ever imagined I would see in my life. But the feeling that washed over me wasn't the giddy thrill I might have expected. It was something deeper, something quieter. It was the feeling of a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying for 5 years, being lifted from my soul. It was the feeling of a debt being settled, not just a financial one, but a cosmic one. It was the feeling of peace. I didn't go on a spending spree. I didn't buy a sports car or a penthouse. The first thing I did was buy the small, charming brick building where my office was located. The elderly owner was looking to retire and was thrilled to sell to someone who loved the place as much as he did. I moved into the spacious, sun-filled apartment on the 3rd floor, above my office. I hired a contractor to do a gentle, respectful renovation, restoring the original woodwork and polishing the beautiful old floors. I expanded my business, hiring another notary to handle the growing clientele. I invested the rest of the money wisely, with a financial advisor Clara recommended. I built a fortress, not of anger but of security. My life became quiet, stable, and entirely my own. I heard things about Greg, of course. Small towns, even within big cities, have their grapevines. Penelope, true to her word, never went back to him. Her lawyers, armed with the knowledge of his fraud, apparently made the separation process swift and brutal. His engagement to the beautiful, wealthy heiress had opened doors for him, and when that engagement imploded so spectacularly, many of those doors slammed shut. Business partners grew wary, credit lines tightened. His mother, Eleanor, and brother David, who had been so quick to defend him, turned on him when they realized a significant portion of the family's unofficial trust fund, my money, was gone forever. They had loved him for his success. When that faltered, so did their loyalty. He was left with his millions, of course, but he was also left alone, a pariah in the world he had worked so hard to conquer. A few weeks after it was all over, Clara and I went out to celebrate, not at some Michelin-star restaurant that Greg would have chosen, but at a cozy little Italian place in our neighborhood, with checkered tablecloths and Chianti in straw-covered bottles. Clara had her own victory to toast. She had won her case in small claims court. The tech company had been forced to pay her invoice in full, plus her legal fees. It wasn't life-changing money for her, but it was a profound moral victory. It was the principle. We raised our glasses of cheap, delicious red wine. "To the quiet warriors," she said, her eyes sparkling. "To the quiet warriors," I echoed, and we clinked our glasses together. And that, really, is the end of the story. It's funny, isn't it? For 5 years, I was haunted by Greg's betrayal. I thought justice would be this loud, dramatic courtroom battle, a thunderous verdict that would prove to the world that I had been wronged. But it wasn't like that at all. Justice arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, disguised as a routine administrative task. Greg didn't realize that in striding so arrogantly into my office to get the paperwork for his new life stamped and sealed, he was actually handing me the keys to unlock my own. He put the weapon in my hand and told me exactly where to aim. Some people might hear this story and say I should have gone further, that I should have sent him to prison, that I let him buy his way out of a felony. Maybe they're right. From a purely legal standpoint, he deserved the full weight of the law. But that would have meant more years of my life tangled up with his. More courtrooms, more depositions, more anger. It would have meant keeping the wound open. And I was tired of bleeding. I realized it was never really about destroying him. It was about rebuilding me. I didn't want him in jail. I just wanted my money back. I wanted my life back, and I got it. So let me ask you, what would you have done? Would you have pushed for the public immolation, the prison sentence, or would you have taken the quiet, clean victory that allowed you to simply close the book and walk away into your own peaceful future? Sometimes, the most powerful move isn't the checkmate. It's just quietly taking all your pieces back. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt like your voice was taken away, or that an injustice would never be righted, I hope this gives you a little bit of encouragement. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. I genuinely love to hear your perspective. And if you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more true stories of vindication and new beginnings.